American artist, so she comes from the United States, and we're gonna kind of dive into her work. I also have a video of me reading a story about her life with some awesome illustrations, and then of course the demostración, the demonstration video as well. So let's dive into her work and some new vocabulario. So Georgia O'Keeffe, these are some portraits of her right here, so photographs of her, and then here's some of her paintings. So who was Georgia O'Keeffe? She was an American modernist painter. She was born in Wisconsin, which is kind of like a neighbor to Michigan up here in the Midwest, way back in 1887. She lived a lot of her life, though, in the desert of New Mexico. She also lived part of her life in New York City. So very different from the New Mexican desert is New York City. So good contrast there. And then some of her paintings reflect that contrast in the different ways of life in New York to New Mexico. She did pass away in 1986. She was the age of 98, and she had a passion for painting and playing the violin. So music was a big part of her life as well. And so was science. Science and music and art, she was kind of connecting all of these content areas, subjects. She enjoyed abstracting the natural world and painting still life objects. We know what a still life is, but she would zoom in super close, making them seem more abstract and different from what they really were. So if she really loved nature and she wanted to paint and draw natural scenes or flowers or plants, she would zoom in so close that you almost couldn't even tell that they were flowers or plants anymore. It made them seem gigantic, huge, and more impressive. That's how she saw them. And this quote over here I like, "I found I could say things with colors and shapes that I couldn't say any other way. Some things I had no words for." So she had these ideas in her head, and she didn't really know how to talk about them, so she would paint them. And she used color and shape and space as well. So space is like filling the whole composition, creating like a huge environment by zooming in, but also she loved landscapes and the desert scenes. She also did cityscapes when she lived in New York, but the desert landscapes were kind of her trademark. And then here's a link down here to a YouTube video that talks more about her life and works as well. I'll put that in the instructions as an extension. So here's a new vocab word for you, a triptych. So triptych kind of sounds like triangle, a three-sided shape. And we know a trio is a group of three portraits. So a triptych, that same TRI beginning, a triptych's a set of three artworks put together. So a diptych is two artworks put together. A triptych is three put together. And actually, here's an example right here of a triptych. 1, 2, 3, uno, dos, tres, three put together side by side. We're going to make a triptych based on three styles or motifs, themes that O'Keeffe incorporated into her work. So the sky and clouds, something she loved. Zoomed in objects, we already talked about. She loves doing that. And then desert landscapes, potentially with a skull, because when she lived in the desert, she acted like a scientist-artist combo. She would go out in nature, she would find the bones of animals and different plants and different flowers, and she would make still lifes out of those. So like in the fall, I make a still life out of harvest objects and fall objects, symbols of the fall. And sometimes we zoom in super close, but not as close as Georgia O'Keeffe would. So here's some more of her paintings. You can see landscapes. These are kind of simplified landscapes. Here's a good reflection as well. But the clouds, the sky, she loved also mixing tints and shades. So if you remember, a tint, you add white. If you want it to be light, you add some white. If you are making shades, you add darker colors. So a shade, technically by definition, you add black, but you could just add darker versions of colors to make your shades. So for instance, a light blue mixed with dark blue would make a shade of blue, but here she added black to like a taupe sandy tan to create a shade as well. And then the clouds, she had a variety of sizes and shapes, but they were all clouds, so that creates rhythm. So lots of elements and principles of design in the work of Georgia O'Keeffe. It's just so fascinating. Here's some more paintings. So you can see she's actually using some complementary colors, some reds and greens, some blues and oranges, and then those skulls that she would find would appear in her work. Sometimes she would zoom in on them and make them kind of the focal point, but sometimes she would use her imagination and have the skull kind of floating in the sky over a desert landscape. So realistic landscape, but then a little surrealism or dreamlike, a little wacky, and imaginative, adding the skull floating above the landscape. So you can combine a little bit of your imagination as well. Here's some of those zoomed in flowers. So again, we see some complementary colors. I see some red and green, some yellow and purple, and a little bit of orange next to blue as well. So contrast, complementary colors. She really did hit every element and principle, and that's what is so fascinating about it, and why she became famous, and the works are in museums all over the world. So zoomed in flowers there. When you do your zoomed in image, it doesn't have to be a flower. It doesn't have to be like what O'Keeffe would do. You could zoom in on something important and special to you. So part one of the triptych, again, a triptych, a group of 3 artworks put together. You're going to paint a desert scene. Well, you could do a landscape that you would like to do. I chose a desert because A, that's what Georgia O'Keeffe did, and I've been really inspired by her work, but also I want to kind of explore New Mexico and the Southwest United States, just like Georgia O'Keeffe did. I've been to New York, but I haven't been to New Mexico, so I would like to go to the places Georgia O'Keeffe went. So we're going to paint a desert scene or any landscape with complementary colors, some values, some lights, some darks. I did think about atmospheric perspective, so it is a little lighter at the horizon line and a little more detailed in the foreground. So if you would like, you could also add the skull, and sometimes there's flowers next to the skull. And I did it as a collage. I did it as a pop-up collage, actually. So I did the skull on a separate piece of paper. And then once I finished it, I cut it out. I made a pop-up with scrap paper. I didn't do the accordion fold. I just kind of folded the paper so it kind of created almost like a table for the skull to sit on, and then I glued that there so it's popping up. You can actually see the shadows underneath because it's popped up 3-dimensionally off the surface. I thought that added a surreal element as well, that it's like really floating there. So you don't have to add the skull, but if you would like to, you could. So I did a observational drawing of a skull actually painted by Georgia O'Keeffe. I looked at her work just like I would look at a still life to draw it. So you could do a pop-up, you could do desert scene, but a landscape, maybe with a skull. And I used chalk and liquid starch. If you watch the demonstración video, you will see that in action, and I just love the results because it makes the chalk look like an oil painting once you mix the liquid starch with it, and that's how you blend it together. So it's a very interesting and new technique that I think you'd like. So that's part one of the triptych. Part two, something zoomed in up close to seem abstracted. So I looked at flowers that Georgia O'Keeffe painted because I liked the contrast, I liked the tints and shades, and I just kind of liked her work. So I wanted it to remind me of Georgia O'Keeffe whenever I looked at it. You can zoom in, like I said earlier, on anything you want. So you could look around the room and pick something, or you could choose something at home that is important to you, and something that might even be a symbol that describes you, something that you really enjoy, and you could zoom in and abstract that so that maybe other people wouldn't automatically know what it was, or it would just make it seem more important and large and in charge if you zoom in like that. So I used temper cakes. I did use a little pencil first to sketch it in, and then temper cakes on top. But you could use watercolor. You could paint it, and then once it dries, like use a little Sharpie or colored pencil on top. So you could make it mixed media instead of just one thing. So zoom in on something, part 2. All right, part 3, numero tres of the triptych. You're going to focus on the sky and clouds, and you can choose nighttime, daytime, sunrise, sunset. You could look at an actual photo, or you could look at a painting by George O'Keefe. I kind of did a little bit of both. I wanted to do the sunset because I like those cotton candy clouds, I call them, where there's a little pink and purple and yellow in the sky mixed in with that blue. And then because I mixed with white, that would be a tint. So think about tints and shades. If you're doing the nighttime, you're going to do a lot of shades. If you're doing daytime or even sunset, sunrise, and a little bit at night, you still have tints where the clouds almost seem to glow. So if you think of like the color value scale 0 through 4, it's white is 0, and then those tints, and then the paint right out of the bottle is a 4. So think about that. I actually did some of the Tappy Tap cloud painting while the blue in the background was still wet, so it would mix a little bit in, and then you get an awesome texture, and then the clouds are a little more transparent. It's almost like the sky colors coming through a little bit. So that's why I did it that way. Or you could let it dry completely, so you have just straight up white clouds, because that's what George O'Keefe did sometimes too, if you remember her paintings. So in my background here, can you tell which are tints, which are shades? So down here, a little bit of shade, up here, tints, and right here, kind of a paint right out of the bottle or mixed with a little white. So it almost creates a value scale in the background as well. And you can do that however you'd like. I use liquid temper paint to do this part of the triptych. All right, so afterwards, to make it a triptych, you got to put all 3 together. So this is my finished example. Remember, yours is unique and not just like mine. We all have different artistic visions. We can also put the works in different orders. Oh my, I forgot a W here. You can put your works in different orders. So I played with it a lot. I didn't know in what order I wanted. I kind of thought the skull floating looked good at the top. Kind of the clouds in the middle is kind of calming in the middle, and then those zoomed in flowers kind of anchor it at the bottom. So again, a triptych's 3 artworks put together. You can decide what order you want to do. Again, you don't have to do a desert that looks just like George O'Keefe. You don't have to do a sky that looks just like George O'Keefe, and you sure don't have to zoom in on flowers or natural organic material from outside. You could zoom in on whatever you want that's important to you. But if you want to zoom in on things and make it look more like George O'Keefe, that's perfectly fine too. You have that vision and that artistic intuition guiding you. And I mounted them on black paper. You can mount it on a different color paper if you'd like. But a triptych is what we are focusing on, and then these different techniques to work like George O'Keefe. So I hope that you can pause and go back and look at more of her works, continue to read the instructions, and maybe watch the extension video, and then of course watch my demonstración if you want to get a closer look at how I'm doing this stuff. I cannot wait to see what you guys come up with and your artistic visions, because you are all champions, you are all unique, you're all thebomb.com. Keep up the good work, guys. Adios, amigos.